Hello and welcome to the Fishing Guide Podcast. I'm your host, Brad Wiegmann. Tell you what, we have a hot topic that we're going to talk about today, and we're pretty fortunate to have John Stein with us. He's the Regional Fisheries Biologist for the Arkansas Game and Fish Commission. He's been on the show so much that I can actually say that without looking at my notes. But it's a privilege to have you come on the show and kind of talk about the program that you're going to be doing with the stripers and talk about the results, what you're going to do with the results. And then you got to stay tuned because towards the end, John's going to destroy some of those fallacies people have about striper fishing. So tell us about the program that you got started.
Okay. So we, like I said, I'm a fisheries biologist for the Arkansas Game and Fish, and Beaver Lake actually has a really good trophy striped bass fishery, as we all know. And to maintain that fishery, we have to get some data from, we do some gill netting ourselves. We did an exploitation study, but to manage the fishery, we need to get our hands on a tremendous number of striped bass. And that's really hard for us to do when we're just out netting, doing our general sampling, because striped bass move around quite a bit, and we can't just go out there and electrofish like we do for black bass for striped bass. So one of the things that's really important is working with anglers to get information from anglers. And so we have a journal program right now, and we're handing out a journal to all the guides that are out in the lake fishing. Okay. And fishermen in general that are striped bass anglers that are targeting striped bass on a pretty much daily basis. And basically we're handing out a journal that a guide will, starting May 15th, the end of June, every time they're on a striper trip, they're going to fill out a journal for each day, and they'll write down a date. They'll write down how many rods are out, how many anglers are in the boat, the time they are fishing, and then they'll write down the lengths of striped bass caught. And this gives us information on catch per hour of striped bass, catch per rod number, gives us lengths of the fish, the fish that are caught. And to give you an idea how many we've done this 2 years in a row. We're doing it on Beaver. We're actually doing it on Lake Ouachita and Lake Norfork, where our major striper fisheries. And basically, to give you an idea how many fish we're getting turned in, the lengths we're getting turned in, we'll get over 1,000 to 1,200 striped bass lengths from the journal program, and that would probably take us 2 months of gill netting to do that, to catch those numbers, just because, as we all know, stripers move around. They're just really hard to sample with our nets. So working with anglers is ideal. And we've done this 2 years in a row, and we've got some really good information about catch rates, how many stripers are being caught. We're using that information along with our we have an exploitation study going on where we tagged a bunch of stripers. We tagged like 260 stripers, and if you catch one, they have 2 tags in them. If you catch one, turn the tag in. The tag's worth $100. And basically you call our office and we get information on, the big thing was that fish harvested or released? And it's going to give us information on how many are being harvested in the lake. And we can use that as well as our angler journal data and age data, because 2 years ago, we actually got carcasses from the guides, and we got over 380 carcasses that we pulled otoliths on to see how fast stripers are growing. And then with the 1,200 lengths, we had some great data that's going to be able to help us determine, hey, do we need to have some type of regulation change on striped bass in Beaver Lake? We know that as time goes on and this population, the people population up here is growing, we're seeing an increase in the number of striper anglers. We're seeing that in our creel surveys, and just we think that in the future to maintain a trophy fishery, we're going to have to maybe protect some more of those striped bass that are in the fishery. We may have to have some type of regulation change, maybe a stricter minimum length limit in the cool months. We could also look at increasing stocking rates compared to what we've done in the past. So that's kind of how we're using this information to that really helps us draft some new regulations and make the striped bass fishing better, or the way it used to be. We just feel that right now there's a tremendous amount of pressure, and there's some regulation changes that may be needed in the future, especially as this population is growing.
Right.
I think we're going to keep seeing more and more people that are wanting guided trips, or they're going to be fishing for stripers on their own.
Right.
So all this information is allowing us to get scientific data to make a really, really good science-based regulation change on striped bass and Beaver Lake. So, before we do that,
right,
we'll get all the information together. We'll design what we think needs to be done, and then we'll have we'll open it up to the public, guides, fishermen, to say, hey, what is your input on this?
Right. So a trophy striper, what length do you like say that's a trophy striper?
What length?
What length do you start saying, like, look, we are looking at trying to have a population of 9-pounders, or because they run kind of in a generation, don't they? Like that class year and that class year, and obviously some probably live longer. Some class years probably seem to grow better or something. Yeah, and not all the fish that you stock come from Arkansas hatcheries, right?
Right. So originally, we normally go to Lake Ouachita, and we get our brood stock from Lake Ouachita, the Andrew Halsey hatchery in Hot Springs.
Right.
Spawns the fish and then raises the stripers that are stocked statewide. We've been doing that for 35 years.
Right.
But recently, we've started going to other states to improve the genetic diversity of our striper fisheries. And so the last 2 years, we've actually got striped bass from North Carolina, and I think that's really improved the stocking success, bringing in new genetics into the situation, and so that's gone on recently.
How long does it take for a striper? How much do they grow each year, and what is their pounds that they weigh each year?
So, the first year they're looking, a striped bass can be...
They're stocked at what size?
They're stocked at 2 inches.
2 inches.
About 2 inches,
Well,
so pretty small.
I'm a fisherman, so my 2 inches might look like 4 inches.
Yeah, 2 inches is pretty small, but they
Right.
the reason why we stock them at 2 inches is if, we had 100,000 stripers in a pond and we raised them to 8 inches,
Right.
if we had 100,000 in there, we'd probably end up with 200 really big ones. They eat
Right.
each other. So to get our numbers, we stock them at 2 inches, and it has been working. They normally when we stock the stripers, the shad have already spawned. There's a lot of shad swimming around, and so that when you put those stripers in the lake, that's not the only thing fish can eat. There's a ton of shad out there, so they kind of get masked where the stripers don't get eaten, the small ones.
Right.
And we've produced a really good fishery through stocking those. And so we stock them at 2 inches. In the first year, they're about, the end of the first year, they can be 6 to 8 inches.
Wow.
So they grow really fast. The second year, they're 16 to 18. And then by age four, they're over, most all of them are over 26 inches. And that's kind of that's a really fast growth. Right. Beaver Lake, all of them are. The majority of striped bass, once they get to 4 years old, they're 26 inches. That's probably like 5, 6, 7 pounds, somewhere in there.
Right.
And if you compare that to other lakes that have slow growth, like Lake Texoma,
right.
Beaver Lake, all the lakes in Arkansas, striped bass do not naturally reproduce.
Okay.
Let's look at Lake Texoma. They naturally reproduce there.
Right.
There's a tremendous number of stripers that are spawned every year, and they have a huge creel limit, and then you can catch 15 a day or something like that.
Right.
But a Texoma striped bass is getting to is only 22 inches at age 4. On Beaver and all our lakes, they're 26 at age 4, so they're growing really fast.
And our current length limit for keeping them, and what's the number of fish per day?
You can keep so there's a 20-inch minimum length limit, and you can keep 3 a day per angler. And that may be something that we change in the future, is like we were talking about, based on all this data we're getting.
I see. So let's talk about some of the things that people always talk about when they talk about stripers in reservoirs. And so, of course, there's probably going to be some answers coming after they see the video. That's good, because conversations are good. But tell us, what do you think the biggest misnomer is? I'll say that I've cleaned stripers since '89, and before that, I've never really found other game fish in their stomach. So what is actually their forage base?
So striped bass, this has been shown over and over again. Striped bass main forage base is gizzard and threadfin shad. And there have been studies in the past that have shown where lakes that have really good threadfin or gizzard shad numbers, the striped bass numbers are pretty good. Yeah. If you have a shad die off, any issue with shad, their numbers drop down, striper numbers will drop down. There have been tons of studies that have looked at striped bass diets, and over 90% of their diet, a lot of studies, it's above 95% of their diet is shad. And so that's one thing that has been, a lot of people think that they're eating crappie, they're eating largemouth on a daily basis, and they're not. Right. They're mainly eating, they're going to go after gizzard shad, threadfin shad, because they're mainly striped bass are an open water species. They're not, they're not going to be up hanging out in shallow water. They're going to be out swimming around and looking for forage out in the, out off the bank. And that's why they mainly target threadfin and gizzard shad. And
so what temperature of water do they normally stay in? Because actually that controls where they are living, like especially like in the summer months, where up in the river arms, if we see one, I always like to say now, if we see one, he's a very confused striper. It's a jailbreak. He's got lines, he's got stripes on his jersey because he's a jailbreak.
That's right. Well, so in the summertime, they, right now, striped bass can be all over the lake. A lot of times they're up in the river arms because they're getting, they're spawning or done spawning. But those eggs don't survive. Right. But during the summer months, they have to find a thermal refuge, which is down by the dam. The lower 5,000 acres down by the dam. There's a bubble of water below the thermocline that striped bass can get in that has good amounts of oxygen, and it's in the it's cooler water in the 70s instead of the upper 80s or 85, and they get concentrated in that area, and all summer long, that's where they're going to be most of the time. And then after the thermocline, once the water temperature starts dropping off in September and October, then they'll move out of that and spread around in the lake again.
I see. What else have you addressed? Some issues that you've heard from, say, black bass anglers?
One thing we've heard is that the Arkansas Game and Fish just started stocking stripers and hybrid striped bass, and they're going to ramp up stocking by the millions. That's not the case. We've been stocking striped bass in Beaver Lake since the late 1960s, so pretty close to when the lake was impounded. And we have a reason behind the stocking. We're actually, our stocking rates are driven by science, by this information that we get from angler journals, from the guides, from our netting, and basically from looking at how fast stripers grow. Right. And stocking rates are based on that. If we had really slow growth rates, we would reduce the amount of stocking, because that shows that there isn't enough forage for the stripers that are out there and they're growing too slow. So we've been stocking striped bass for years. There is a reason behind we do striped bass stocking. We're trying to produce a trophy striped bass fishery where they have fast growth. We're stocking moderate numbers, and we want to have very fast growth so anglers can catch, those 40-pound plus fish. And so we just don't, that's one thing that I want anglers to know, is we're not just out there willy-nilly stocking striped bass all over the state. We have a reason. We have a striped bass management plan, and we have a reason why we're, there's a method behind it, why the numbers that we want to stock, and it's to produce a trophy striped bass fishery stocking moderate numbers. Another thing people, mainly striped bass anglers or anglers in general, if you ask somebody what kind of fish do you want, what's your fishery, what's your ideal fishery, they say they want to catch more, bigger fish.
Right.
And that's really hard to do, because when you have more of something, you can't have really good growth.
Right.
It's like on Texoma, they have more and they have very slow growth. There's a fine line there. And so if you have more of something, if we had a huge striper fishery in Beaver Lake, we wouldn't have trophies.
I see.
But if you have moderate to lower numbers, you're going to have faster growth. And so that's kind of what we try to tell all anglers, is even black bass anglers, crappie anglers. If you have too many, there isn't enough forage to feed them, they're not going to get big.
How about the money trail? People are saying, I know that I looked on social media and I saw where people were saying that the money spent for stripers is taking money away from the black bass, that they might be able to use that money to enhance the black bass fisheries.
I don't believe that's the case at all, because a lot of our largemouth bass fisheries are naturally, they're driven by natural reproduction. We stock very few, especially in this part of the state, very few largemouth bass.
Right.
And we actually have, the Arkansas Game and Fish actually has a fairly large stocking program for Florida largemouth bass, Florida strain largemouth bass in the southern part of the state.
Right.
And that's one thing that we're always, striped bass pond space is always competing with Florida largemouth bass pond space at our hatcheries. And so I don't see there's any issue with, the money that's, the few ponds that are used to raise stripers are competing with what's out there for for stocking Florida largemouth bass or managing largemouth bass in general.
And up here, did Swebco's the one that would have got the Florida strain, right? Did they get some?
Swebco is, we don't need to stock anymore.
Oh, all right.
About 25 years ago, there was a forage crash in Swebco. The bass numbers, we had a really cold winter and they had shut down at one point. A lot of fish died out. Largemouth did. And we came back in and we started stocking Florida largemouth bass for several years. And because it's a really hot lake, the Florida bass did really well. It's like a Florida lake because it's warm year round. And so we have some of the best Florida bass genetics in the state in Swebco.
All right.
So we don't have to stock it anymore. It just keeps pumping out some really good fishing.
Okay. Is there anything else that you might have heard I
think the big thing is forage, and then what striped bass eat. And like I said earlier, we just don't go out there and stock striped bass willy nilly. We actually have a plan at what our stocking rates are going to be, trying to produce a trophy striped bass. And we only, in the Arkansas Game and Fish, we only stock 3 lakes in the state of Arkansas with stripers. It's Beaver, Ouachita, and Norfork. Those are our premier striper fisheries. So we don't stock stripers all over the state.
Right, just there.
And where we do stock them, we have a plan to produce trophy fish. And it's all science driven. And we want to thank all the anglers, the guides that have helped us fill out these angler journals, because it's really important data that we're getting.
There you go. That takes us to PICO time. Basically tackle time, and PICO makes a complete line of hard and soft baits, and you can use them to catch everything from black bass and also to great big stripers. They'll eat them too. So check them out. They're at PICOLures.com. John, if they wanted to find out some more information, if they want to be part of the journal, and they do a lot of striper fishing, they didn't know that, how would they get in contact with you?
If you got a pen, you can write down my phone number. It's 479-682-5885. 640-6422.
Right.
You can call that phone number. You can contact, you can get us on, we have a Facebook page,
Okay.
AGFC Fisheries Facebook page.
Okay.
You can comment there. But mainly getting a hold of me on my phone number would probably be the best way, and we can get back with you.
Okay.
Yep.
Sounds good. Well, like I always like to end the show, make sure you keep your hook sharp and your lures in the water.